What if I told you that the absolute number one reason you're failing to learn a new language is, well, it's actually because you're trying to learn its grammar.
Right. Which sounds completely backwards.
Exactly. It sounds totally backwards. I mean, we're all conditioned to think that grammar is like the absolute foundation of a language. But today, we're looking at this cognitive research and data from top language academies, and it basically proves that staring at grammar rules is actually destroying your ability to speak.
It's the ultimate trap. It really is. And it's the exact reason why, millions of adults walk away from language learning feeling like they just aren't wired for it.
Yeah, they blame themselves.
Right. They blame their own intelligence when in reality they were just using a biologically incompatible method.
Which brings us to our mission today. So welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive designed specifically for you. And I mean that literally you are sitting right here at the table with us as the third person in this conversation.
Glad you're here.
Our goal today is crystal clear. We're building the ultimate step-by-step study routine for learning English from absolute zero. We're specifically targeting those foundational A1 and A2 levels, and we're doing it based on how your brain actually works.
Yeah, we've gone through a massive stack of sources to build this blueprint. We're synthesizing cognitive memory research, practical guides from language academies, and specific media recommendations tailored entirely for absolute beginners.
It's not just theory, right?
No, not at all. We're not just looking at what to do, but the actual neurological mechanisms of, why it works.
It's going to be packed with actionable steps. But hey, before we get to the very first thing you need to do, I just want to drop a quick, friendly reminder to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is honestly the absolute best way to keep these deep dives coming right to your feed so we can keep exploring these fascinating topics together.
Definitely.
So let's set the stage here. You're at day 0. You're staring at a blank notebook. You don't know a single word of English. What is the very first move?
So the very first move, and this is crucial, you have to establish your anchor.
Okay, what does that mean?
Before you download a single app, before you buy a single book, you must write down a concrete why. And it cannot be vague.
So something like, I want to learn English because it's good for my career. That doesn't cut it.
Not even close.
Really?
Yeah, that's not going to sustain you when the process gets frustrating. The sources emphasize writing down something hyper-specific. So I want to reach the A2 level in 6 months so I can speak comfortably with my spouse's relative living abroad.
Okay.
Or, I need to hit A2 by December to pass my company's basic proficiency check so I can get a promotion.
I mean, I get that it's motivating, but why does the brain care about that level of specificity? If I want to learn, shouldn't that just be enough?
Well, it comes down to how your brain prioritizes metabolic energy.
Metabolic energy, like calories.
Exactly. Learning a completely new language is incredibly expensive from a cognitive standpoint. Your brain is consuming a massive amount of calories building those new neural pathways.
Wow, I never thought of it like that.
Right. So if your brain doesn't have a highly specific, emotionally resonant reason to expend that energy, its biological default is just to take the path of least resistance.
Which is quitting.
Exactly. It will actively try to shut the project down to save energy, and you'll just quit. Your why is the engine that overrides that biological survival mechanism.
I see. So it's literally tricking your brain into thinking this new language is vital for your survival.
Pretty much.
Okay, so we have our hyper-specific why written on the first page of our notebook. We're motivated, now we hit the books. But according to the data, this is where almost everyone walks straight off a cliff.
Yeah, the grammar trap.
The grammar trap. The Language Academy data is brutal on this point. Starting your language journey by memorizing grammar rules is the #1 predictor of failure.
It really is.
Trying to learn grammar before learning vocabulary is, it's like studying traffic laws before you even have a car.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. You can know exactly who has the right of way at a 4-way stop. You can know all the speed limits. But if you don't have a steering wheel and an engine, you are just standing on the sidewalk. You need the vehicle first.
I really like that analogy because it mirrors natural language acquisition perfectly. Think about how children learn their native tongue.
They just listen? Right.
Yeah, they don't study the mechanics of the past participle before they demand a cookie.
Right.
They acquire meaning first. They learn the word go, and then they figure out when much later, simply through repeated context. Grammar is a descriptive framework that experts built after a language already existed. It's not a prescriptive set of laws you have to learn before you're allowed to speak.
Okay, so if we aren't starting with grammar textbooks, which is a relief, where do we start? How do we build a car?
The most efficient starting point is mastering the 500 to 1,000 most common English words.
Hold on, just 500 words?
Yeah, because 500.
That doesn't sound like nearly enough to hold a real conversation, though. I mean, English has hundreds of thousands of words.
It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but lexical frequency distribution is heavily skewed. Those core 500 words, basic verbs like go, come, have, want, need, and, your basic nouns, they actually make up the vast majority of daily functional conversation.
Really? Just those basics?
Yep. If you know those 500 core words, you can navigate a startling amount of daily life. You don't need to know the word precipitation to tell someone it's raining.
That's very true. But the sources are incredibly strict about how we are supposed to learn these 500 words. You can't just write down a list of 500 translations and stare at it.
Never. Absolutely never. Context is king here. You should never learn a word in isolation. If you want to learn the word want, do not just write want on a flashcard.
What do I write there?
You write the full phrase, like, I want coffee.
Why, though? Isn't it faster to just memorize the single word? You're adding extra words.
It might feel faster in the moment, but it won't stick. Words aren't stored in your brain like alphabetical files in a cabinet. They're stored in webs of association.
Webs of association, okay.
Yeah, if the word want is floating by itself, the brain has no sensory data to tie it to. But putting coffee next to it gives the brain a physical, sensory anchor, a smell, a taste, a morning routine.
Oh, I get it.
You're giving the brain multiple threads to pull on when it needs to retrieve the word later.
Okay, I want coffee. Got it. But here is the age-old problem for literally every learner. I memorize, I want coffee on Monday morning. I feel great about it. By Wednesday afternoon, it is completely erased from my brain. How do we fight that?
Ah, so you're running up against the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
What?
The Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Back in the late 19th century, a psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered that without active review, you forget about 70% of new information within 24 hours.
Wait, 70% in one day? That is ruthless.
It is ruthless, yeah. But it's actually an evolutionary feature, not a bug. Your brain is a highly efficient machine. It's constantly bombarded with sensory data, the color of a passing car, the feeling of your shoes, a random word you read on a billboard.
Right.
If you remembered everything, you'd go mad.
Yeah.
So the brain ruthlessly deletes data. It thinks you don't need to survive.
Okay, so how do we stop it from deleting our brand new English vocabulary?
You use a technique called spaced repetition.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Yeah, to signal to your brain that this information is necessary, you use flashcard apps like Anki or Quizlet. These apps have spaced repetition algorithms built right into their code.
So they do the math for you.
Exactly. They're designed to show you a word right at the exact moment your brain is about to delete it. By forcing your brain to recall it just as it's fading, you send a powerful signal. You're basically saying, do not delete this, I need it.
Wow.
And doing this for just 10 to 15 minutes a day completely flattens that forgetting curve.
That makes a lot of sense. But even with the algorithm working its magic, we all have those stubborn words. You know the ones. You stare at the flashcard, you've seen it a dozen times, and your brain just gives you dial tone.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do we force those stubborn words to stick without just, bashing our heads against a wall?
This is where the cognitive research introduces mnemonics. A mnemonic is a memory technique that uses sound similarities and visual imagery to essentially trick your brain into remembering.
Okay, the sources gave some amazing examples of this, specifically designed for Turkish speakers learning English, and it perfectly illustrates how universal this brain hack is. Listen to this.
Yeah, these are great.
To remember the English word bear, like the animal you picture a massive grizzly bear sitting at a pub drinking a bira, which is the Turkish word for beer, bear, bira.
Right.
Or to remember the English word sleep. You imagine a sweeping vacuum cleaner, which in Turkish sounds like silip, tucked neatly into a bed, fast asleep, silip sleep.
They are incredibly vivid, bizarre mental images.
I have to be honest, though. Thinking up a crazy, absurd, highly detailed story for every single word you learn, that sounds exhausting. Isn't that just adding way more work to the learning process?
Well, it would be entirely exhausting, which is why you shouldn't do it for every word.
Oh, okay.
You only deploy this strategy for the stubbornly difficult ones. the words you keep failing in your spaced repetition app.
I feel like I'm finally understanding why this works. It's like the brain is a bouncer at a nightclub.
Okay, I like where this is going.
If you hand it a boring gray agli card, like a dry vocabulary list, it just turns you away. It's not interested. But if you show up in a neon clown suit with a grizzly bear drinking a beer, the bouncer is so shocked that he just lets you right in.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Mm.
The brain naturally discards dry, logical lists because they just don't simulate anything, but it clings to absurd, colorful, emotional, or humorous imagery. When you create that bizarre mental image of the sleeping vacuum cleaner, you aren't just using your language center. You're activating your visual cortex, your spatial processing, and your emotional centers all at once. You're creating multiple neural pathways to one single piece of information.
Okay, so let's recap where we are. We have our why. We are dodging the grammar trap. We are learning our core 500 words in context, using spaced repetition algorithms for 15 minutes a day, and building weird mnemonic stories to get past the nightclub bouncer for the tough words.
Perfect summary.
So, we've built the vehicle.
Precisely. And now you need to drive it in traffic. You need language input.
Which brings us right into the daily routine. Now that you have some vocabulary, how do you consume English every day without burning out? And actually, speaking of daily routines, if you are enjoying this deep dive and want to make learning how the world works part of your routine, right now is a great time to hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel.
Definitely do that.
So, input. How much time are we really talking about here? Because people have jobs, they have kids, they have lives.
The sweet spot, according to the academies, is a daily 30 to 45-minute routine. Consistency completely beats marathon sessions.
So binging English for 3 hours on a Sunday isn't as good as 30 minutes a day? 3 hours is more total time.
It comes down to how sleep consolidates memory.
Okay.
When you learn something, the actual cementing of that knowledge into your neural architecture happens while you sleep. If you binge for 3 hours on Sunday, you get one night of sleep to process a massive, overwhelming amount of data.
Oh, and your brain just dumps it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Most of it will be lost. But 30 minutes a day gives you 7 nights of sleep to incrementally consolidate that information.
Fascinating. So break down that daily 30 to 45 minutes for us. What are we actually doing?
Ideally, you spend 10 to 15 minutes on your vocabulary flashcards, 15 to 20 minutes on active listening or watching, and 5 to 10 minutes on speaking.
Let's focus on that listening part. What should absolute beginners at the A1 or A2 level actually be watching? Because trying to watch a complex drama like Succession or, a fast-paced comedy is just going to be demoralizing.
Yeah, that's a terrible idea. You need comprehensible input. The sources highly recommend starting with well-produced children's shows.
Cartoons for adults.
Yes, specifically shows like Peppa Pig.
Peppa Pig.
I know, it sounds funny, but it features a very clear British accent, a slow pace, and lots of repetition of daily routines. Bluey is another excellent choice. It exposes you to an Australian accent and focuses heavily on family, household vocabulary, and everyday situations.
Okay, I actually love Bluey, but what if cartoons just make someone feel silly? Like they just can't get into it?
Then you transition to podcasts, specifically designed for learners. The Learn English podcast by the British Council is fantastic for A1 to B1 levels. There's also Culips, which features everyday English conversations, and Stuff You Should Know, which has a moderate pace and covers fascinating topics so your brain stays genuinely engaged with the content, not just the language.
Now, I noticed the expert guides mention a very specific rule for consuming this media, the 80% rule.
Yeah.
They say you are aiming for about 80% comprehension.
Yes, that 80% rule keeps you in what cognitive psychologists call the zone of proximal development.
Wait, the zone of proximal development, that sounds incredibly academic. What does that actually mean for me sitting on my couch watching Peppa Pig?
Think of it like lifting weights at the gym. If a workout is too easy, your muscles don't grow. If you try to lift a 500-pound car, you don't grow either. You just break.
Right.
The zone is that sweet spot where the weight is heavy enough to challenge you, but manageable enough that you can actually lift it. If you understand 100% of a podcast, it's too easy. If you only understand 40%, it's too hard and you'll get overwhelmed.
I see.
At 80%, you're following the story, but your brain is constantly stretching to figure out that missing 20% through context.
That makes total sense. But we can't just put these podcasts on in the background while we do the dishes, right? How are we supposed to be listening to get that muscle growth?
You have to use the shadow technique. It is an active, highly engaged form of listening. that bridges the gap between input and output.
Walk us through the shadow technique. How do I do it?
Step 1. Watch or listen to a short segment, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, with English subtitles turned on, and slow the playback speed down to 0.75x if you need to catch the individual sounds.
Okay, slow it down, subtitles on.
Step 2. Pause the audio and shadow the speaker. You literally repeat the sentences out loud, trying to mimic their exact pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation.
Mimic them. Got it.
Step 3. Rewatch that same clip, but this time turn the subtitles off. You want to train your auditory cortex to catch the words without relying on your visual cortex to read them.
I've heard of shadowing, but I have to push back a bit here. It just sounds like mindlessly parroting sounds. If I'm just copying what I hear, how am I actually learning what the words mean?
It's not about meaning in that exact moment. It's about biomechanics.
Biomechanics, yeah.
Speaking a new language requires moving the physical musculature of your mouth, tongue, and throat in completely unfamiliar ways. Shadowing trains your motor neurons. It builds the physical muscle memory required to produce English sounds fluently, so that when you actually do want to express a meaningful thought later, your mouth knows how to form the words without you having to consciously think about it.
Ah, so you're tuning the instrument before you play the concert. I love that. And that brings us to a huge hurdle. We're taking in all this English, we're inputting, but input is only half the battle. The biggest errors, the moments where people freeze up and quit entirely, happen when they try to produce the language, when they try to speak their own thoughts.
It is a massive psychological barrier. Our sources synthesize the top mistakes beginners make into 3 distinct categories: leaving speaking to the very end of the learning journey, maintaining irregular study patterns, and above all, the crippling fear of making mistakes.
Let's tackle that first one. Leaving speaking to the end. The fix here is to speak immediately. Output from day one.
Precisely. You do not wait until you feel ready, because you'll never feel ready. You construct 3 simple sentences every single morning out loud. Just talk to yourself in your house.
Like what?
Like, I'm learning English. I have a cup of coffee. I want to go to work. Use those foundational structures. I am, I have, and I want.
I get the logic, but man, what if you feel completely ridiculous talking to yourself in the mirror, knowing you're making nonstop grammar mistakes? It feels deeply unnatural. Adults have, complex, nuanced thoughts, political opinions, deep emotional insights, and suddenly you're reduced to saying, I like red apple. It's a huge hit to the ego.
It is a massive hit to the ego, absolutely. And this raises a fundamental question about how we view failure. Through our traditional schooling, we're conditioned to view errors as a sign of incompetence. A red X on a test means you failed.
Right.
But in language acquisition, errors aren't failures. They're the exact mechanism of learning.
A mechanism itself, not a byproduct.
Exactly. You must prioritize fluency and the physical act of speaking over grammatical perfection. The grammar is learned within the speaking, not before it.
Okay, give me an example.
You learn to ride a bike by falling off the bike, not by sitting on the couch reading a physics textbook about balance.
That is so true.
When you speak, you make a mistake, you realize it sounds wrong based on the input you've been listening to, and you correct it. That feedback loop is how the brain actually internalizes the grammar rule.
Making mistakes is how the brain calibrates. I really like that. But here is where it gets interesting. Making mistakes is fine. Falling off the bike is good. But falling off the bike the exact same way every single day for a year isn't helping anyone. If I keep saying I goes to the store and I never fix it, I'm just building a bad habit. Right. So how do we stop those repeated errors?
This requires a highly structured feedback loop. The language academies detail a specific rule for beginners to prevent fossilizing those bad habits. You must keep a dedicated notebook to record your errors.
A mistake journal.
Yes. Whether it's a written mistake you made or a spoken one you caught yourself saying, write it down.
And then what? We just stare at a depressing book of our own failures.
No. You review them systematically. You institute a weekly review. Dedicate 1 day a week, let's say Sunday, solely for review. No new vocabulary, no new grammar concepts.
Walk me through a Sunday review. What am I actually doing?
You sit down and ask yourself, what did I learn this week? You revisit that mistake journal and look at the errors you logged. Then you go back to the audio you were shadowing during the week. Find a difficult 30-second clip and shadow it again to see if it feels easier.
Oh, to check your progress.
Exactly. And finally, you make a 15-second voice recording on your phone, summarizing your week in English.
I can already hear our listeners groaning. Nobody likes the sound of their own recorded voice, let alone stumbling through a language they barely know. Is that level of discomfort really necessary?
It is absolutely vital because it serves a crucial neurochemical purpose, celebrating your wins.
Celebrating wins by listening to a bad recording.
Think about it. A major reason learners quit is that they fail to measure their progress. When you're in the weeds every day, it feels like you aren't improving. But when you track your errors, and when you have an archive of voice recordings on your phone, you create a tangible, undeniable map of your improvement.
So you can literally hear yourself getting better over time.
Yes, you can listen to a recording from 2 months ago, hear how much you struggled, and realize how much smoother you sound today. It triggers a massive dopamine release in the brain. It's incredibly motivating. You should actively celebrate those small victories. Use your new vocabulary to write a tiny 20-word mini story. When you succeed, acknowledge it. It fuels the engine for the next week.
So let's zoom out and summarize this ultimate beginner routine for anyone starting from absolute zero. First, you find your hyper-specific why to convince your brain the energy expenditure is worth it. Second, you completely ignore the heavy grammar books and focus on mastering the core 500 functional words using spaced repetition apps and bizarre mnemonics to get past your brain's nightclub bouncer. Third, you commit to a 30-minute daily routine where you actively shadow comprehensible A1 to A2 shows like Peppa Pig or beginner podcasts. Fourth, you force yourself to speak out loud from day one, accepting that making mistakes is the actual mechanism of learning. And finally, you rigorously track those mistakes and review them every single Sunday, recording your voice to measure your progress.
It is a comprehensive, biologically aligned blueprint for language acquisition. It respects how the human brain actually processes and stores information, rather than fighting against it.
It really does. It takes the mystery out of it and replaces it with a solid, achievable mechanism. And hey, if you want to keep mastering new topics with us, finding out how things actually work under the hood, give us one final enthusiastic click on that subscribe button for the YouTube channel. We'd love to have you back for the next deep dive.
As we wrap up this blueprint, I want to leave you with a final idea to ponder based on everything we've discussed today about how the brain processes language.
Lay it on us.
Think about those mnemonics we discussed. If learning English forces your brain to constantly create these highly bizarre creative connections, like picturing a grizzly bear drinking a beer to remember a single word, how might the journey of achieving fluency literally rewire your brain's creativity? How might it alter the fundamental way you perceive the world around you?
Wow. It's not just learning a language, it's literally expanding your mind's capacity to connect the dots in everyday life. So when you are staring at that murky, muddy landscape of a new language, remember you aren't just memorizing rules, you're building the car day by day, word by word, mistake by mistake, until suddenly you're driving.